Do we even know who is this 4chan person or website?
He may, and I'm sure we're gonna be able to get some more confirmation on this as the hours and minutes go on. He may have been just a system administrator who knew his way.
A group of anonymous internet users used star constellations, flight radar data, and the position of a single tree to locate a flag that was being live streamed from a secret location somewhere in the world. It only took them 3 hours to track it down. This flag was part of an anti-Trump art installation by actor Shia LaBeouf. He'd put it up specifically to be unfindable. Anonymous internet users helped coordinate the single most successful political meme campaign in history, putting their thumb on the scale and helping put a reality TV host into the White House partly on the back of jokes about a cartoon frog. In 2008, these same anonymous users took on the Church of Scientology and won. They showed up to protest in Guy Fawkes masks outside Scientology buildings in 14 countries. Mainstream news outlets had no idea what they were looking at. These same users also gave us Rickrolling, Lolcats, Rage Comics, Wojaks, Pepe the Frog, the SCP Foundation, and QAnon. Every single one of those things can trace back to the same website. A website that has been financially precarious since the day it was launched in 2003. Blacklisted by every major advertiser, investigated by attorneys general, and blocked by governments worldwide after mass shootings. It's still online. It's called 4chan. And the thing that people always struggle with, the brick wall I keep hitting with while writing this video, is how do you even describe it? It's an image board, a website made up of nothing but text and images. It's the boogeyman of the internet. But when you try and get into the details, you end up either underselling it completely or making it sound like a supervillain's origin story. So let me try and explain it properly. And to do so, I have to go all the way back to 1995. Because unfortunately, it all started with terrorism.
At the height of the morning rush hour in the world's most crowded underground system, the madness of indiscriminate murder. More than 3,000 subway passengers were affected. Several people had been seen planting packages at stations and on a number of trains.
The unseen chemicals striking people down in a matter of seconds.
On the 20th of March 1995, members of a Japanese doomsday cult called Aum Shinrikyo boarded trains on 3 lines of the Tokyo subway system. During the morning rush hour, they released sarin gas. Sarin is a nerve agent. It was developed as a chemical weapon during World War II, and exposure to even a tiny amount is enough to kill you. Over a dozen people died. Thousands more were injured, some of them permanently. It remains one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in Japanese history, and it happened on a Monday morning, to people just trying to get to work on the train. That same year, someone made a game about it. Actually, people made 2 games. The first one is called The Story of Kamakashiki Village. Developed by a small outfit called Happysoft. The name is, I would assume, chosen purely to antagonize the cult. It was released on June 29, 1995, less than 4 months after the attack. You play as Shoko Asahara, the cult's leader. You manage operations, you indoctrinate your followers, and you solicit money from them. The game's own advertisements, placed in an underground magazine called Game Urara, which is known primarily for shock images and pirated software, described the player's role as, and I'm quoting directly here, selling off your own saliva, blood, cum and such to stupid believers. The advertisement also included the line, "We have absolutely no relation with Aum Shinrikyo. We hate them." The game has 2 endings. You win by carrying out the sarin attack, you lose and the world ends in Armageddon. It used real footage of the cult that the developers had pulled from news broadcasts, and the soundtrack was music actually sung by Asahara himself, which the developers had apparently obtained and decided to use ironically. It was sold by mail order only and came on 12 floppy disks for the price of 14,500 yen. Some people have claimed that this game was actually created by the cult itself as propaganda. I can't find any evidence that it was, and to most, the footage, the imagery, the music, all looks like it's being used to mock them. The advertisement alone makes that explicit. Within months of a nerve agent attack that had killed over a dozen people and injured thousands more, the Japanese underground had already turned it into a product. Not out of reverence, but more out of contempt. The internet has always had a cultural reflex towards transgression. The game that directly connects to where we're going is called Kasumigaseki, named after one of the stations where Aum Shinrikyo carried out the attack, released the same year, distributed through underground channels to people who knew where to look. Where Kamakashiki Village was satire, Kasumigaseki was very much not. Again, you were one of the cult members. Your goal is to place 5 gas canisters around the Tokyo subway system and harm as many commuters as possible. There's no real ending to this game. No score screen with a moral weight. No punchline. It's just the act of killing people, over and over. Developed by a completely anonymous creator who has never been identified to this day. A man named Masayuki Shiba liked this game so much that he built a place to share it. He created a text-only dial-up bulletin board called Ayashi Warudo. It translates as Strange World. Its sole original purpose was to be a place to anonymously share mirror links to Kasumigaseki. But the thing about building an anonymous space with no rules is that people will fill it with whatever they actually want. And what they wanted turned out to be considerably broader than just one video game. The original version of the forum closed within a few months as interest in the game faded, but Shiba wasn't done. He rebuilt Ayashi Warudo under the same name using a free trial of Digital Eden, a BBS service provider. Digital Eden publicly indexed his anonymous text board for the duration of this trial. By the time it ended, the hit counter had exceeded 400,000. Pause on that number for a second. Getting 400,000 hits on a website in 1996 was not a small achievement. There's no algorithm surfacing it, no social media to share it. Just words spreading through IRC channels and early forums. Every single one of those potential users had found their way to an anonymous, effectively unmoderated bulletin board built by a man operating in the darkest corners of the internet. In 1997, it got exactly the kind of attention it didn't want. It's not terrorism this time, it's child murder. The Kobe child murders had an iron grip on Japan. A series of killings and assaults targeting children carried out by a 14-year-old who the press referred to as only Boy A due to his age. Then Ayashi Warudo poured fuel on the fire by leaking the alleged real name of the suspect a full day after his arrest, but well ahead of any official disclosure. This is the first time you can see the pattern clearly. Anonymous spaces plus breaking information plus zero accountability equals, well, let's just call it an unintended public release of information. The resulting wave of new users from this news coverage overwhelmed the servers entirely and took the site offline. The site spent months bouncing between hosts, using the downtime to redesign, eventually emerging with a chalkboard aesthetic of light text on a dark green background. The site expanded over time, with new boards for current events and general discussion marking a shift away from purely underground content. And as other competing forums closed, their users needed somewhere to go, and Ayashi Warudo, fully anonymous and almost entirely unmoderated, was there waiting for them. It eventually became the hub for a subculture called Nanashi, meaning nameless, which became the foundational philosophy of Japan's underground internet in the late 90s. This was the idea that what you said mattered more than who was saying it, that stripping away identity was a feature, that the words will stand on their own. In practice, what this meant was doxing, software piracy, coordinated hacking, and organized site-wide trolling expeditions known as brigading all found a new home there, flowing through one of their own subboards called the Gesu board. Gesu translates as scum, a name its users wore with some pride. They decided collectively that the rules everyone else had followed were for everyone else to follow. And it couldn't last. The hosting infrastructure was never built to handle the growth, and the frequent crashes made Shiba a target of harassment by his own users, which, if you ever run anything online at any scale, you will recognize immediately. In September 1998, he closed Ayashi Warudo, posting a farewell message that read, "If I don't say anything, all sorts of speculation will arise about the reason for the closure, so I suppose I'll write a little about it. First of all, let me just say there's absolutely no pressure from authorities or any major corporation. None at all. It's more like the ones that will wipe out humans are humans, you know. Underground communities clashing and destroying each other. It's just so petty, isn't it? I just want to get along with everyone, but this is ridiculous. It's oddly touching that a man who built his community around a terrorist attack simulator ended up signing off permanently because people were being mean to him. There's a certain poetry to it. The site that hosted some of the worst content the early internet could produce was ultimately killed. Not by the authorities or any outside force taking it down, but by its own users turning on the person running it. And as these users scattered, they needed somewhere to go. So they went to the first chans. The most significant place these scattered Ayashi users landed was a site called World. It was created by a former Ayashi user whose true identity again remains unknown to this day. There's a lot of this happening in this story. He's referred to in what documentation still exists simply as Mr. Amazo. World had been running since August 1997, quietly and modestly as a fairly unremarkable anonymous BBS. Nothing to really distinguish it from anything else at the time. But when Ayashi's World closed in September 1998 and thousands of homeless users suddenly needed somewhere to land, Mr. Amazo did something quite important. He rebuilt. At this point, every bulletin board worked the same way. All threads were displayed strictly chronologically. They lived and died by the time of their original creation, regardless of whether anyone was still talking in them. A thread started 3 weeks ago with 100 replies from today still sat buried under everything posted since. Mr. Amazo scrapped that entirely. He introduced what's called the floating thread system. Popular threads push to the top based on activity, not age. You reply to a thread, it rises. You ignore it, and it sinks, and eventually gets swallowed by anything newer. You can trace the fact that controversy and engagement beat out age and the raw passage of time on almost every major platform we use today, back to this one anonymous Japanese bulletin board in 1998. On October 28th, Amazo was featured as the pick of the day on Impress's Internet Watch, the most widely read Japanese website in 1998 for technology news. Getting the lead slot on Internet Watch was kind of the equivalent of getting featured on MSN or Yahoo in the West. An anonymous underground bulletin board landing that kind of mainstream recognition spoke to how quickly these fringe spaces were becoming something the wider internet was starting to notice, even if it didn't yet understand what it was looking at. Among those people paying close attention was a 22-year-old Japanese exchange student named Hiroyuki Nishimura, killing time in a college apartment in Conway, Arkansas, while his classmates went home for a summer break. He'd found Amazo and seen exactly what it was doing right, and he noticed exactly what it kept getting wrong. On the 30th of May 1999, he launched 2ch.net. He announced it in a post on Amazo itself, calling it quite deliberately Amazo's second channel. Or rather, 2-channel. And we'll come back to that because first Amazo had to finish dying. Throughout the summer of 1999, Amazo deteriorated, ground down by rampant spamming, vandalism, and the same pattern of harassment that had killed every predecessor. Death threats were directed at Mr. Amazo, his personal information posted to every forum he was running. The only thing that limited the damage was that he never made his identity public in the first place. The exact date the website finally died is unclear. The servers were so constantly up and down towards the end that nobody can really pin it down with any kind of accuracy. My sources say somewhere around December 30th, 1999. At this point, the pattern of these websites was clear. Build an anonymous space, watch it fill up, watch it turn on itself, and then watch it die. And then repeat. In its final days, it was still serving as a bulletin board, hosting advertisements for other BBS sites. Among them were links to places like Licentious Notice Board. This is one of the earliest attempts of what we'd now recognize as an image board, a place where instead of just text, you could share images alongside it. It sounds obvious now, but in 1997 it was genuinely new. It had just not been conceived of before, and it didn't last long, leaving no direct successor, but the idea had been planted. Now, back to 2channel, because this is where that cycle finally broke. On the 30th of May 1999, in that college apartment in Conway, Arkansas, Hiroyuki Nishimura launched the site he'd been building while Amazo slowly fell apart around him. He was ostensibly there studying psychology at the University of Central Arkansas as an exchange student. He eventually graduated, but not before launching what would become the largest internet forum in the world. The name was a direct reference to VHF Channel 2, the default input on the RF modulators that connected the NES and Famicom to a television set. The second channel, the one you switched to when you wanted to play. I'd also wager that by hosting it in Arkansas where he was, instead of Japan where most of his user base was, 2Channel was able to bypass Japan's more restrictive censorship rules while remaining fully accessible from Japan. Whatever happened on those boards, Japanese law had a much harder time reaching it. He had watched Amazo and Ayashi carefully. He knew exactly what had worked and what hadn't. He took Amazo's floating thread system and built it on the one thing every predecessor had failed to find: a reliable server. That's obvious, right? It doesn't help that it's the thing nobody wants to write down on a whiteboard when they're explaining the history of the internet because it's too mundane, but it's true. Hiroyuki took everything Amazo and Ayashi had built and put it on an infrastructure that didn't collapse under its own weight. And because of that, this website didn't fall apart. It kept going. Early days were not smooth, though. Far from it. In the year 2000, barely 12 months after launch, a user posted a cryptic threatening message on 2Channel about a bus in southern Japan. And then they got on that bus, stabbed multiple passengers, killing one. The message had been there on the site before it happened. Time is a flat circle. The more things change, the more they stay the same. You are going to see this happen on so many of these websites throughout history. This was the moment Hiroyuki's legal philosophy got its first real test. His position was quite clear, and he would repeat it consistently for the next 2 decades. His exact words were, "The reason why I don't pay compensation is that I think I am not responsible for what others post." He accumulated over 100 lawsuits as a result, or rather attempts at lawsuits. He consistently ignored summons and refused to pay damages. He only cooperated with the police when genuine threats of violence were involved. He drew the line right there, but critically, not an inch before it. This position made him a folk hero to some and a serious liability to others. By 2002, Google reported that the most searched word in Japan was 2Channel. Isn't that crazy? Not a news story, not a celebrity scandal or event, just a bulletin board, run anonymously for anonymous users. Where Ayashi and Amazo had been defined almost entirely by underground content and technology discussion, 2Channel had created hundreds of niche boards covering mundane, everyday topics alongside the usual chaos. Cooking, sports, relationships, local news, it eventually had over 1,000 boards in total. It had done something none of its predecessors had ever managed to do. It had gone mainstream. 2Channel also introduced one more thing: trip codes. A short encrypted code generated from a password displayed alongside posts as a unique identifier. For the first time, you could establish a relatively consistent identity across multiple posts without ever revealing your real name. A way of being known without being known. This was an attempt to thread the needle between the nashi culture that had defined the space in the beginning and the practical need to sometimes distinguish one voice from another. Records I found state that by 2007, 2Channel was bringing in over 2.4 million posts per day, making it the largest internet forum in Japan. Dentsu Inc., the country's biggest advertising agency, reported that of the 2.8 billion articles, blogs, and forums it had analyzed for clients between 2006 and 2009, 2Channel accounted for 75% of the content. Their spokesman said 2Channel was extremely influential as an online information source and couldn't be ignored. A site that had grown directly from the same soil as a terrorist attack simulator, built by a student killing time in an Arkansas apartment, was now being discussed in corporate advertising reports. And it was this dominance that finally brought Mr. Amazo back out of retirement, angry and with an unlikely ally. Kazuhiko Nishi was the co-founder of ASCII Corporation, one of the biggest names in Japanese tech publishing. In summer of 2001, he went name searching, and whomst amongst us hasn't done this? He eventually found a thread about himself on 2Channel and decided to argue with it. And then, having lost the argument to anonymous strangers on the internet, publicly denounced 2Channel and, this is a direct translation, toilet graffiti, and announced that he would build something better. Mr. Amazo had his own reasons to dislike 2Channel, given the persistent rumors that Hiroyuki had been raiding Amazo in its final months. The two of them allied together and chose the name 1ch.tv. This was chosen deliberately. If 2Channel was the second channel, then 1Channel would assert itself as the legitimate first. They launched on October 5th, 2001, 2 full years after 2Channel, and it failed almost immediately. Many such cases there, sadly. Strict content moderation drove away the exact users it needed, but the killing blow came in December 2001 when an admin botched a server reinstall. The misconfiguration exposed every single user's IP address along with the admin passwords, and the entire source code of the site. For a platform whose entire pitch was that it was safe, responsible, and trustworthy, this was about as bad as it could get. The staff board was readable, users could identify the moderators, just a complete shit show. Nishi later denied having anything to do with 1CH at all. Even back in 2001, 2channel was enormous. You know how I said Hiroyuki brought in stable servers? Well, he hadn't brought in enough stable servers. Enormous levels of traffic bring enormous instability. At this point, Hiroyuki was hosting the whole thing on his own private servers, and the infrastructure simply wasn't generating enough income to keep pace with its own growth. The site was, to be blunt, buckling under the pressure of its own success. Users who had watched Ayashi die and had watched Amazo die were starting to get that same funny feeling again. The pattern was so well established by now that it had almost become a ritual. Remember, build a space, fill it, watch it set itself on fire, and die. So they did what the Nanashi world had always done when something was about to collapse. Build a backup. On August 30th, 2001, a group of programmers from within 2channel's own community launched Futaba Channel, also known by its domain 2chan.net. The name translates as two-leaf. It started as a pure text board refuge, exactly what it was designed to be, to somewhere for 2channel users to land if the main site finally went under. But then something unexpected happened. The crisis was averted. Programmers from 2channel's Unix board identified critical inefficiencies in Hiroyuki's self-written code, and over the course of a few days in August 2001, they collectively optimized the server, reducing load by 90%. 2channel was saved. That meant Futaba was redundant as a backup, but rather than dissolve the product, its developers kept going. Over the following months, Futaba started evolving into something its creators hadn't originally planned. Users began needing to share images, not just text, so rather than using offsite hosts, they built that functionality directly into Futaba. What had started as a text board backup was quietly becoming an image board. The first dedicated image boards launched on Futaba in March 2002, and by June, secondary boards had been created to separate the focus topic boards from the overflow of spam and increasingly extreme content. The most notable of these overflow boards was called Nijura, a Japanese pun that roughly translates as the hidden side, or dark side of the rainbow. They assigned it the designation B. And Futaba also released its underlying code as an open source, free for anyone to use, modify, or build on. The decision wasn't dramatic at the time, it was just a practicality, but it would turn out to matter enormously. And for any of this to reach the English-speaking internet, one more thing would need to exist: a bridge to the West. On the 3rd of March 2003, a 16-year-old Japanese high school student named Tachiro Kosugi, posting under the handle RIR6, launched a website called World2CH. It was, to put it simply, an English version of 2channel, a place where Japanese and Western internet users could actually talk to each other. Kosugi didn't speak English particularly well. This wasn't a criticism, just relevant context for everything else that follows. The site started as a pure text board with the usual array of news, politics, and hobby boards, and for a while, something genuinely strange was happening. Western and Japanese users coexisting on the same boards and posting in the same thread. They were importing 2channel memes across the language barrier. It was barely functional, but that was sort of the point. There was a regular Japanese user who appeared in nearly every thread where English was being spoken, demanding that the Americans remove their military bases from Okinawa immediately. Every time, without context or prompting, just remove the bases. His handle was Golgamoy. The Western users were fascinated by him. He became the site's unofficial mascot. The Western users who found their way there were mostly goons. Say it with me, not that kind of goon, but members of Something Awful's anime subforum ADTRW, who had stumbled across World2CH and recognized the format from their occasional ventures with Futaba Channel. They were already familiar with how this worked. They just needed somewhere English to do it. And eventually, they talked Tachiro into adding an image board. He added two, actually. One for general and one for more extreme content. This made World2CH the first public English-language image board, beating 4chan by a matter of months. Sadly, this beautiful thing did not last. Tachiro had sole control, and no one else was allowed to help, and he was also a high school student running a bilingual image board for users in completely different time zones on free hosting with no backup systems. Of course it wasn't going to last, are you stupid? He started adding features that broke things, then fixed the features in ways that broke more things. Eventually, he broke the reply function entirely, said he'd fix it, stopped paying for the server, and then World2CH quietly went offline. But there is one thing World2CH did that outlasted it entirely. When Tachiro translated the two-channel interface into English, he had to decide what to call the default anonymous username. In Japan, it was Nanashi, nameless. He considered the options, and he went with anonymous. The Western Internet ran with it. While all of this was happening in Japan, the Western Internet was doing its own thing. And the Western Internet, as it turns out, was also pretty messed up. In 1999, the same year Hiroyuki launched 2channel from his Arkansas apartment, a man named Richard Kiyanka launched a comedy website called Something Awful. If you haven't seen my other video, How Banning Hentai from a Comedy Forum Changed the World, I'd recommend checking that out. It covers a lot of the downstream story from here in a lot more detail than I think I can fit together. I would consider both of these videos companion pieces. Go and watch it after this. If there's any contradictions, I would say this video takes precedence. The short version is, Something Awful is one of the most influential websites on the Western Internet. Kiyanka's username was Lotax, and his main talent, it turned out, was creating spaces he absolutely hated managing. He also hated when his general bullshit subforum, the catch-all dumping ground for posts with no dedicated home, got flooded with one type of content. His solution, consistently, was to build a new subforum and silo the offenders into it rather than deal with them directly. Which is how he ended up with a subforum called ADTRW. ADTRW originally stood for Anime Death Tentacle Rape Whorehouse. While the acronym was eventually changed to Animated Drawings to replace Women, the original name was never meant to be welcoming. It was meant to signal clearly, I think you're all weirdos with awful taste. And into that hole went the proto-weebs of the early internet. To post about anime girls, and because the internet in the early 2000s had a high tolerance for this sort of thing, a lot of hentai made up of increasingly questionable content. One of the people actively posting in ADTRW during this period was a 15-year-old student from New York. His name was Christopher Poole. You might know him as Moot. Lotax hated nuanced moderation. He hated it so much that eventually he stopped trying to manage the hentai problem in ADTRW with any kind of precision, and declared a complete and total ban on hentai across the site. Gone. Post it and you're out. This kicked off what the community has come to call the pedocaust, a period of mass permanent bans targeting people posting increasingly illegal adjacent content. Some of the people were genuinely posting deeply concerning material, some were just caught in the blast radius. Either way, they were out. And all of those banned users needed somewhere to go. Which brings us back to Moot. He'd already built them somewhere to land. On the 1st of October 2003, he started a thread on ADTRW announcing a new site he'd built. He'd called it 4chan.net. Initially just an anime image board for English speakers, the thing he and the rest of ADTRW had always wanted but never quite had. He'd taken Futaba Channel's open source and run the Japanese text through AltaVista's Babelfish translator to make it English friendly. A scrappy job done quickly. Functional enough. Moot was already an active member of Raspberry Heaven, the Something Awful's adjacent file-sharing community that had become the off-site refuge of ADTRW's more dedicated users. He chose 4chan's earliest moderators, called janitors, directly from that community, people he already knew, people who already understood what the space was supposed to be. The site launched with a single image board. B. A direct descendant of Futaba's Nijura, a direct descendant of Ayashi Warado's Gesu board. The same no rules, no themes, anything goes philosophy that had defined the underground Japanese internet since 1995, but this time it was in English. Within its first week, the site had over 1 million hits across 9,000 unique sessions. Before the end of 2003, new boards were being added. H for hentai, C for cute anime, D for alternative hentai, Y for yaoi, A for general anime. A lolicon board called L was created, immediately attracted genuinely illegal material, deleted, brought back briefly, and then quietly deleted for good. The server cost $500 a month within the first year, and Moot was a 15-year-old living with his mother funding the whole thing on her credit card. So it's safe to say the launch did not go entirely smoothly. Some of the World2CH crowd were not happy about 4chan's existence. Their position was straightforward. They felt their entire idea had been ripped off, and they weren't quiet about it. The main instigator was a user called Menchi, who threatened to contact 4chan's ISP to get the whole site taken down for hosting lolicon content. The ISP was indeed contacted, and in February 2004, GoDaddy suspended the 4chan.net domain. Moot moved everything to 4chan.org, where the site remains to this day. It later emerged that Menchie was actually a user called She, who had by this point become a 4chan moderator himself, who had also been permanently banned from Something Awful after a 12-page thread in the subforum called Fiad, or Fuck You and Die subforum, targeted him personally, revealing what the documentation describes charitably as a cascade of pedophilic behavior. She was also a prolific Wikipedia administrator, over 21,000 edits, with notably very strong opinions about the Lolicon article specifically. Fork found in kitchen, I guess. Moot later confirmed in a Reddit AMA that She was involved in developing World 4chan, a short-lived 2004 attempt to rebuild what World 2CH had been. It flopped and then was folded back into 4chan. But while we're here, one more name worth flagging from that original ADTRW announcement thread. Marshall Banana. Marshall is, not coincidentally, the person whose permaban from Something Awful is widely considered as the opening shot of the pedocaust. At the time, he was a fixture of the ADTRW community, popular largely for his extensive hentai collection, which he shared freely with anyone who wanted it. The Fiad subforum dug through his personal server, found suspicious Xenogears hentai, handed it to Lotax, and he was removed in August 2004. Unfortunately, he was also one of the earliest moderators on 4chan. You can see him right here in the announcement thread, moderating C from the beginning. He was also, if you read these posts back, the person who had to be repeatedly told that C, the cute anime board, was not supposed to double as a lolicon board. His response to complaints about this material was essentially, deal with it. The man who helped moderate the earliest version of 4chan was the same man whose banning set off the wave of exiled users who made 4chan what it would eventually become. Again, if you want the full story on that, see the companion video. These are kind of meant to be watched together. It's now time to talk about the good times. Before the bad ones. A lot of people call it the Golden Age. From roughly 2005 through to 2011, 4chan was what most who were there would call its idealized peak, the golden age of 4chan. This is an era I'm nostalgic for when I talk about the old internet. Not because it was clean or safe or good, but I was a teenager. Everyone is nostalgic for what they experienced as a teenager. I think what helped was that for most people, it was new, exciting, genuinely chaotically alive in a way that almost nothing is on the internet anymore. This is where Rickrolling came from. You know the bit, you click a link expecting something, you get Rick Astley. It started there. Lolcats, a simple format of a cat photo with misspelled impact text. I Can Has Cheeseburger originated in 4chan's culture and eventually became its own website, generating millions in revenue. Rage Comics, the 4-panel MS Paint strips your uncle shares on Facebook sometimes. You know the one. The ones with the troll face and the Forever Alone guy. All of it came from here, from anonymous users riffing on each other's drawings until a visual language emerged. Pepe the Frog, in his original, completely non-political form. These are more modern, but Wojaks are worth pointing out. Feels Guy started on a Polish image board called VChan, but eventually spread to 4chan and then spread further. And then there's this. On June 22nd, 2007, at 1:40 in the morning, someone posted a single message to 4chan's X board, the paranormal board. It described a concrete statue, humanoid. It couldn't move while you were looking directly at it, but the moment you looked away or blinked, it would close the distance and it would kill you. The post was called SCP-173. The author, later identified as Wesley Williams, posting as Moto42, expected it to be forgotten in the week. In fact, the thread was deleted 2 days after it was posted. What he didn't anticipate was that other users had already saved it and were already riffing on it. They were asking what's out there, what are the other SCPs? What started as a single anonymous post that was supposed to just disappear became the SCP Foundation, now one of the largest collaborative fiction projects in history, with thousands of articles across dozens of languages. A massive creative universe built entirely on the back of something an, at the time, anonymous person posted at 1:40 in the morning and expected no one to remember. Anthony Fantano, one of the music critics of all time, built his early following on 4chan's Mew board. 4chan was one of the most creatively fertile places on the internet. The fact that things had to be good enough to survive on their own merits because there was no reputation attached to them meant you couldn't coast on your follow account or your previous work, Every post stood or fell by its own merits. But it was developing something darker alongside of that. Raid culture had existed since Hayashi Warado's Gesu board, but 4chan scaled that up. The concept is simple. Coordinate a large group of anonymous users to descend on a target simultaneously and cause maximum disruption. The most famous early example was the Great Habbo Hotel raid of July 2006. Habbo Hotel deserves its own video, but the short version is, imagine a children's virtual world, a pseudo-MMO, and rumors had been spreading on B that 4chan's moderators were racially profiling users, banning anyone with a dark-skinned avatar. Whether or not that was true, B decided to respond in the most B way imaginable. Thousands of users flooded the site simultaneously, all dressed as identical avatars, dark skin, enormous afros, black suits, forming human blockades around the entrance to the hotel's pool, declaring it closed, due to AIDS. It sounds completely stupid. It was stupid, but it also demonstrated something important, that you could coordinate thousands of anonymous people towards a single target through nothing more than a shared sense of chaos in a thread on B. There's no leadership or organization, just a post, and then a human wave. Fox News covered 4chan at this time, the segment becoming one of the most mock pieces of journalism in internet history. They called Anonymous the internet hate machine. They called them hackers on steroids. The coverage was so spectacularly wrong that 4chan treated it as a badge of honor and played clips of it for years. And then in January 2008, something happened that showed this coordination could point somewhere more interesting. The Church of Scientology tried to suppress a leaked video of Tom Cruise discussing his beliefs. They issued copyright claims, leaned on platforms trying to scrub it from the internet. 4chan noticed, and they decided to do something about it. What started as just a simple DDoS attack on the Church of Scientology evolved into something that had genuinely never quite happened before. Anonymous moved from the internet into the real world. People showing up to protest outside Scientology buildings in cities across the world. Carrying signs with 4chan memes on them, getting covered by mainstream news outlets who had absolutely no framework for understanding what they were looking at. They wore Guy Fawkes masks, not initially for the political symbolism from B for Vendetta, but because the mask had been used on B for a character called Epic Fail Guy, whose entire joke was that he was a failure at everything in life. The political meaning came later, after footage of the London protests went viral and the masks looked genuinely striking on camera. Alan Moore, who wrote V for Vendetta, saw the footage and said it gave him a warm little glow. Project Chanology, as it's become known, was 4chan at its most genuinely activist. It brought real public attention to Scientology's more predatory practices. It also completely overwhelmed the site with a wave of new users who had entirely different ideas about what Anonymous was supposed to be. The old guard called them moral fags. People who wanted to actually accomplish something with all of this coordinated energy, rather than just doing it for the lulz. The tension between these two factions, chaos for its own sake versus chaos with a purpose, would define the next few years. By 2009, things had settled down into what some people would call the Silver Age. The rougher edges were being worn off slowly. Moot gave a TED Talk. The Time magazine poll happened, the one where 4chan users coordinated to vote him the most influential person in the world, rigging the votes so thoroughly that the first letters of the top 21 names spelt out a message containing 2 4chan memes. Time ran it anyway. 4chan had become somehow a legitimate cultural institution that people wrote academic papers about, that I'm writing this video about. There was the brony phenomenon, the My Little Pony fandom taking over 4chan to the point where Moot had to create a dedicated MLP board in 2012 just to contain it. No relation to my username. There was the He Will Not Divide Us flag capture, Shia LaBeouf putting up a livestream flag as an art project. 4chan users use flight patterns, star positions, and other open-source intelligent techniques to locate and capture the flag, repeatedly, across multiple countries over the course of years. To me, it remains one of the most entertaining demonstrations of what organized anonymous people with nothing better to do can actually accomplish. But something was shifting on the site. In January 2012, Moot deleted New, the news board. His stated reason was that it had become so thoroughly racist that other users were calling it Stormfront, after the white nationalist website. He'd warned them repeatedly, and they didn't listen, so he closed it. 9 months later, in October 2012, he reopened it under a new name, Poll. If you'd like to learn about how that relates to Jeffrey Epstein, then I'm once again pointing you to my other video. What I can tell you is that from this point forward, 4chan starts its lurch to the right, slowly at first, and then all at once. Pizzagate originated on Pol. QAnon had direct traceable roots in Pol's culture. The God Emperor memes of 2016, the ones that framed a presidential candidate as Warhammer 40k's God Emperor of Mankind, came from Pol, and shaped how a portion of the electorate thought about that election. Moot could feel the rightward lurch happening, and he hated it. He'd already watched Gamergate tear the site apart in 2014. When he banned Gamergate discussion from 4chan entirely in September of that year, the backlash was severe enough that it became part of why he stepped down. The whole crowd migrated to 8chan, a website created specifically for people who thought 4chan wasn't free enough. On December 21st, 2015, Moot announced he was stepping down as 4chan's administrator, citing the stresses of controversies like Gamergate. He'd been running the site since he was 15 years old. He did an 8-hour farewell livestream Q&A, announced the site had logged 42 billion page views and 1.7 billion total posts. And in September 2015, he revealed who he sold it to. Hiroyuki Nishimura, the founder of 2channel, the man who had started all of this from a college apartment in Arkansas in 1999. The very person that 4chan had grown from had come back to claim it. And unfortunately, new ownership came with all the same problems. To understand why Hiroyuki's ownership of 4chan went the way it did, you need to understand what had happened to him. And that means understanding a strange guy called Jim Watkins. But also chimpanzees. Observations from the end of the 2010s have led researchers to believe that chimpanzees can use tools spontaneously to solve a task, without needing to watch others first. Chimpanzees at Twycross Zoo in England were provided with a container of water with pieces of floating food. The tested chimpanzees successfully used the sticks, and moreover, spontaneously showed the same applying action pattern as their wild cousins do. Watkins spent 17 years in the United States Army, and while he was still enlisted in 1998, created a Japanese pornography website called Asian Bikini Bar. The logic was identical to Hiroyuki's with 2channel. Host it in the United States, circumvent Japan's censorship laws, serve content that couldn't legally exist on Japanese servers. He later renamed the venture NT Technology. According to Watkins himself, the name was specifically chosen to make pornography purchases less conspicuous on credit card statements. The NT stood for nothing. He left the army to focus on the business full-time, and by the time he was hosting 2channel servers, at least in 2004, he'd built a quiet but significant infrastructure empire around the edges of the Japanese internet. Hosting domain registrations, adult content distribution, all of it running through American servers to stay beyond the reach of Japanese law. Both him and Nishimura had come at the same conclusion, but from completely different, completely unrelated angles, much like the monkeys in Twycross Zoo. In February 2014, Watkins, as chairman of NT Technology and 2channel's domain registrar, seized the 2ch.net domain. His stated reason was that unpaid debts following a 2013 data breach that had exposed the credit card details of thousands of 2channel users. Hiroyuki stated that he'd paid everything owed and Watkins had simply stolen the site. The dispute went through the Japanese courts and was never cleanly resolved. The WIPO refused to intervene, calling it a business dispute rather than cybersquatting. Hiroyuki set up a mirror site and spent years trying to claw it back. While he never got 2channel back, he did eventually buy 4chan. Jim Watkins, meanwhile, had also acquired 8chan. The man who had seized 2channel from its creator now controlled both 8chan and what remained as the 2channel empire. Hiroyuki was coming off losing 2channel in a hostile takeover, a tax evasion penalty in Japan, and was now the owner of one of the most financially precarious websites on the internet. Moot's announcement framed it very generously, calling Hiroyuki the great-grandfather of 4chan and saying none of them would be using 4chan today if it weren't for him. Which is true. It's also true that the man he was handing the keys to had just lost his own website and wasn't exactly coming in from a position of strength. The terms of the sale were never publicly disclosed. Years later, through documents filed with the New York State Attorney General's office as part of their investigation into the 2022 Buffalo shooting, it was disclosed that Good Smile Company, a Japanese toy manufacturer best known for its Nendroid collectible figures, had contributed $2.4 million to the acquisition and received roughly a 30% stake in 4chan in return. Kadakawa Dwango, a major Japanese telecommunications company, put in another $4.8 million. Hiroyuki himself paid $800,000 personally. The maker of Disney-licensed anime figurines owned nearly a third of 4chan. This wasn't publicized at the time. Disney found out when a journalist told them, and they did not renew their licensing deal with Goodsmile. Hiroyuki introduced himself to the user base by holding a Q&A thread on QA. The session was, by most accounts, uncomfortable. Users mocking him for apparent unfamiliarity with Chan culture, him responding in his famously terse style. Someone asked what one change he'd make to the site. He said he wanted more interesting things to happen there, even bad things. This was a wish that would eventually come true. Financially, the situation was not improving. In October 2016, Hiroyuki posted what became known as the Winter is Coming post, laying out plainly that 4chan couldn't afford its infrastructure. He presented 3 options: cut everything in half, flood the site with pop-up ads, or get more people to pay for the 4chan pass. The 4chan pass was never meant to fund a site at 4chan scale. Advertisers definitely weren't interested in putting their products there. The site had effectively been blacklisted from every mainstream advertising platform. It was, to be blunt, radioactive to almost every mainstream brand. No one wanted to have their name sitting next to whatever was happening on poll that week. In 2018, Hiroyuki tried a different approach. He split the site into 2 separate domains: 4chan.org for the problematic boards, and 4channel.org for the work-safe ones, trying to wall off enough of the site to attract some advertising revenue. He confirmed that the split was explicitly a response to being blacklisted, an admission that the site couldn't sustain itself as a unified whole. Then, in March 2019, 4chan was blocked. The Christchurch mosque shooter had posted his manifesto and live-streamed his attack on the internet, and 4chan was one of the places it had spread. Australian telecom Telstra blocked access to 4chan, 8chan, and several other sites entirely. New Zealand ISPs followed within days. It was the first time a Western democracy had moved to block the site at an infrastructure level, and it wouldn't be the last time 4chan found itself on the wrong side of that conversation. The site that had started as an English anime image board, made by a 15-year-old in New York, was now being blocked by governments in response to mass casualty events. And the 2020s aren't much better. The 2020s are the decade where I think consequences started catching up with 4chan. In November of that year, Motherboard, which is Vice's technology division at the time, published an investigation that had been years in the making. Several current and former 4chan moderators had agreed to talk. Their allegations were straightforward and fairly damning. A senior moderator known as Rape Ape had been the de facto administrator of 4chan since Hiroyuki took a hands-off approach to running the site. He had taken the role a bit beyond his job title. He was no longer a janitor, mindlessly mopping the boards of anything that got a little out of hand. He was now steering the ship, using his position to structure moderation across the entire platform in ways that deliberately favored far-right content, attempting, in the words of the moderators who spoke out, to turn 4chan into a recruitment pipeline for the alt-right. The leaked chat logs were specific. In one exchange, Rape Ape instructed a novice janitor on how to handle poll. His exact words were, "Treat poll with kid gloves. So long as they obey the rules, they are allowed to support whatever abominable political positions they want." Moderators who pushed back on this approach or who deleted content Rape Ape liked were fired. 4chan has a global rule prohibiting racist content, but under Rape Ape, that rule was essentially decorative. Documents filed with the New York Attorney General's office later confirmed the payment arrangement. Hiroyuki had been paying Mr. Ape $3,000 a month since 2015, and by May 2022, that fee had risen to $4,400 a month. The same documents showed Rape Ape lamenting that 4chan was getting the blame for the Buffalo shooting, and lobbying an advertising platform called Bid.glass to reverse their decision to pull out of the site. The Buffalo shooting is worth pausing on. In May 2022, a gunman killed 10 people at a supermarket in a historically black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York. In his manifesto, he wrote that he had begun frequenting 4chan in 2020. Specifically poll, and it was there that he was introduced to the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. The New York State Attorney General launched an investigation into 4chan's role in his radicalization. Hiroyuki issued no statement, and the site continued operating as normal. This wasn't an isolated incident when it comes to the chans. The Christchurch shooter had used 8chan, the El Paso shooter had used 8chan, the Buffalo shooter had used 4chan. The pattern was consistent enough that worldwide governments were no longer treating it as a coincidence. Jim Watkins, the man who had seized 2chan and then acquired 8chan, was being summoned before the United States Congress. His son Ron, who administered 8chan, is widely believed by researchers to be one of the people behind the QAnon account. Jim was called to testify before the House January 6 Select Committee, given that 8chan, which had by then rebranded as 8kun, had served as one of the primary organizing platforms for the movement that produced the Capitol attack. The man who had started his career running a Japanese pornography website from a military base, who had seized 2channel from its creator and turned 8chan into the internet's most lawless image board, sat before Congress and answered questions about an insurrection. Meanwhile, 4chan continued its pattern of financial instability and barely moderated chaos. The domain split between 4chan.org and 4channel.org was quietly shuttered in December 2023, for reasons that were never publicly explained. And then in April 2025, 4chan got hacked. Soyjack.party, a splinter image board founded in 2020 by former 4chan users who had been displaced when moderators shut down QA, 4chan's own questions and answers board, had been nursing a grudge for years. A hacker had apparently been inside 4chan's systems for over a year, chose April 14th to execute what they called Operation Soy Clips. At the time, 4chan was still running on FreeBSD 10.1. This was a server operating system last updated nearly a decade earlier. Outdated PHP scripts and insecure database functions meant that the hacker had shell access. The rest followed quickly. Source code was leaked, the email addresses and passwords of 4chan moderators and janitors were exposed. Some of them were .edu and .gov addresses, which raises its own questions. The deleted QA board was temporarily restored. The hacker posting on soyjack.party announced the breach with the message, "You got hacked." The last post before the site went down was a Jack Black chicken jockey meme from a Minecraft movie. The site went dark. Hiroyuki posted a statement saying they'd fix the vulnerabilities in return. And after about 10 days it came back. But the breach had exposed something uncomfortable beyond the technical failures. The leak of moderator identities and real email addresses undermined one of 4chan's foundational promises, that the anonymity went both ways, that even the people running it were nameless. And it turned out they weren't. And we arrived to not really the end of the story, more where we are now. Think about how many of the people who built these spaces had absolutely no idea what they were creating. Shiba wanted to share a game. Mr. Amazo wanted somewhere for refugees from a dying website to land. Hiroyuki wanted to see what would happen if people could say whatever they actually thought. Moot wanted an English image board for anime fans. None of them built what they intended. They built unintentional pressure cookers. Spaces where anonymity and ephemerality and the complete absence of accountability combined into something that had never existed before, and then watched that something take on a life entirely its own. A life that kept going long after any of them had any meaningful control over it. The floating thread system that Mr. Amazo built under pressure in 1998 is now the structural logic of almost every social platform you use. The word anonymous, chosen by a 16-year-old Japanese student who didn't speak English very well, and then handed to the Western internet by a 15-year-old American running Japanese text through an online translator, became the name of the most recognizable hacktivist movements in history. The open source code that Futaba released when their backup became redundant became the foundation of every English language image board that followed. Every single step in this chain was an accident that changed everything. And sitting at the end of that chain is a website that has been financially precarious since day one. Blacklisted by advertisers, blocked by governments, connected to mass casualty events, hacked by its own exiled users, investigated by attorneys general, and is still online, pulling in tens of millions of visitors a month, still generating the kind of content that would get anything else shut down overnight. For better or for worse, 4chan is still here, and the internet wouldn't be the same without it. Thank you for watching. Patreon links are in the description. All the background music in this video is available under a Creative Commons license on my website. And don't forget, the internet makes you stupid.